Steve Harvey has removed exactly 2 people from the Family Feud stage in his entire career. The first was a man who laughed at a single father. The second was a woman who laughed at a widow. What you are about to hear is the second one, and if you ask Steve which one still keeps him awake at night, he will tell you it is this one. Every time. Today, Sandra Elaine Mitchell is 51 years old. She lives in the same house on Magnolia Street in Albany, Georgia, where she lived with her husband Robert for 23 years. She teaches 4th grade at Westover Elementary. She goes to church on Sundays. She keeps Robert's reading glasses on the nightstand next to the lamp he always left on because he said a dark room made him feel like he was forgetting something. She is, by every visible measure, a woman who has rebuilt her life around the shape of an absence. But 3 years ago, Sandra Mitchell was standing on the Family Feud stage in a borrowed black dress, holding a folded funeral program in her left hand. And a woman she had never met was laughing at her because a scoreboard said 199 instead of 200. To understand why Steve Harvey did what he did next, why he crossed the stage, stood between 2 women, and said 5 words that would end one person's evening and change another person's life. You have to understand what was in Sandra's left hand and why she could not let go of it. Backstage at Studio 31 in Atlanta, on the afternoon of October 4th, 2021, Sandra Mitchell was sitting on a folding chair near the green room entrance, holding a piece of paper. It was not a cue card. It was not a note. It was a funeral program, cream-colored cardstock, folded in half, with a photograph of a man on the front. The man was smiling. He was wearing a blue plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His name was Robert James Mitchell, and he had been dead for 4 months and 11 days, and Sandra had been carrying this program in her purse, in her pocket, in her hand, every single day since the service, because putting it down felt like leaving him somewhere. A production assistant named Kiera asked Sandra if she needed anything. Sandra looked up, smiled, the automatic functional smile of a woman who has answered "I'm fine" so many times the words have lost their weight, and said, "No, sweetheart, I'm just fine." She was not fine. She had not been fine since May 24, 2021, when Robert James Mitchell, 53 years old, high school basketball coach, father of none, husband of one, the man who had kissed Sandra goodbye every single morning for 23 years and said, "Have a good one, baby," as if the instruction were necessary and as if he believed she could not have a good one without being reminded, died of a heart attack on the gymnasium floor of Monroe Comprehensive High School at 2:17 in the afternoon, while his players were running wind sprints, and while Sandra was 14 miles away grading spelling tests and had no idea that the last time she heard his voice that morning, 6:42 a.m., "Have a good one, baby," was the last time she would ever hear his voice. Her family stood nearby, her sister Charlene, her brother-in-law James, her cousin Wanda, and her best friend Patricia. They wore matching light blue shirts, Robert's favorite color. Sandra's shirt had a small embroidered basketball on the left sleeve near the cuff, where only she could see it. Charlene had sewn it there the night before. Robert died without life insurance, not because he was careless, because he was 53 and healthy and coached basketball 5 days a week and had a resting heart rate of 58 and had never been hospitalized for anything in his adult life. He had meant to get the policy. He had talked about it. He had printed the application from the school district's benefits portal and left it on the kitchen counter, and Sandra had seen it there and said, "Bobby, fill that out." And Robert had said, "I'll do it this weekend, baby," and the weekend came and went, and the application stayed on the counter. And then another weekend, and then another, and then May 24, and then the application did not matter anymore because the person it was supposed to protect was the person it was supposed to protect against losing. The funeral cost $14,600. Sandra had $2,800 in savings. Robert's school district provided a $5,000 death benefit. The teachers' union contributed $1,500. A GoFundMe organized by Robert's players raised $2,200, mostly in $10 and $20 donations from 17-year-olds, spending their part-time job money to bury the man who taught them how to set a screen and how to be a man in the same sentence. The total raised $11,500. The Gap, $3,100. The funeral home in Albany, Barnes and Son, the same funeral home that had handled Robert's mother's service 12 years earlier, held the balance. They did not pressure. They did not send letters. They simply waited, because Frank Barnes had known Robert since high school, and some debts carry their own grace period. Sandra's salary as a fourth-grade teacher was $41,200 a year. Take home after taxes, $2,940 per month. Mortgage, $890. Utilities, $175. Car payment, $267. Groceries for one, and the word one was a knife she stepped on every time she wrote a grocery list, $220. After expenses, she had $1,388. The funeral balance payment plan was $310 per month for 10 months. That left $1,078 for everything else: gas, maintenance. The classroom supplies she bought with her own money because the school's budget hadn't covered glue sticks since 2018. The medications for the blood pressure that had appeared 3 weeks after Robert's death, and that her doctor said was stress-related, and that Sandra knew was grief wearing a medical name. She stopped buying coffee. She stopped going to the hair salon. She stopped replacing the things that wore out: the bath towel with the fraying edge, the windshield wiper that streaked in the rain, the reading lamp in the living room that flickered and went dark one evening in August, and that she did not replace because the darkness felt appropriate. She started packing lunch from home, the same lunch every day: a peanut butter sandwich and an apple. The lunch of a woman who has reduced her life to its minimum viable inputs. She told Charlene she was managing. She told Patricia the finances were under control. She told the grief counselor at church that she was processing. Every statement was a wall. The truth was behind it. She was not managing. She was awake at 3 a.m. Every night, sitting on Robert's side of the bed, holding his reading glasses, running her thumb along the temple where the metal had been bent slightly from the time he fell asleep grading game film, and the glasses pressed into the pillow. She calculated in her head how many months it would take to pay off the funeral at $310 per month, while the blood pressure medication cost $67 per month, and the classroom supplies cost whatever they cost, and the loneliness cost everything. She applied to Family Feud in July 2021. The application asked for her reason. She typed, "My husband died 4 months ago. I owe $3,100 for his funeral. I am a teacher making $41,000 a year. I just need enough to lay him to rest." The game was in the final round. The fast money clock had expired. The board read 199. 1 point short. Sandra stood at the podium with the funeral program in her left hand and her right hand flat on the surface and her chin level and her eyes on the number. And what was happening behind her face was invisible to everyone in that studio except Charlene, who had spent 48 years learning to read the topography of her sister's composure and who could see, from behind the partition glass, that the surface was about to give. The studio was quiet. The natural, brief pause that follows a near miss. And then Amanda Prescott, team captain of the opposing family, the Prescotts from Buckhead, laughed. It was not a subtle laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had won and who believed that winning entitled her to display the full architecture of her satisfaction without considering who was standing on the other side of it. She turned to her husband Bradley and said, "Loud enough for the boom microphone, loud enough for the front 6 rows, loud enough for Sandra, 1 point. That's got to hurt." The word hurt landed in the studio like a stone dropped in still water. 300 people heard it. 300 people went silent. Sandra heard it. Her hand tightened on the funeral program. The paper creased under her fingers. Her jaw locked. She did not turn around. She did not need to see the source. She had been a 4th-grade teacher for 19 years, and she knew exactly what cruelty sounded like. And she knew exactly what it looked like when a person chose to be cruel in a space where someone was already wounded. Steve Harvey heard it. His head turned. The same slow, deliberate turn, the same settled expression, the same transformation that every person who had seen the Caldwell incident recognized instantly. He looked at Amanda Prescott. He looked at Sandra Mitchell. He looked at the funeral program in Sandra's hand. He could see it now. Could see the photograph on the front. Could see that this woman was holding a dead man's face while a stranger laughed at her score. The studio fell completely silent. Steve walked to center stage. He positioned himself between the 2 podiums. He looked at Amanda. "You will not laugh here." Amanda's smile disappeared. "Steve, I didn't mean." "You laughed at a woman who was holding her husband's funeral program," Steve said. His voice was quiet, level, the voice of a man who is not performing anger but delivering a verdict. "You will leave my stage." Amanda opened her mouth. Steve shook his head once. Now the Prescott family left. Bradley first, then Amanda, then their daughter, their son, their niece. They walked off in the kind of silence that follows a dismissal, the silence of people who understand in the space of a few seconds that the room they are leaving has decided something about them unanimously. It was the second removal in the show's history, both on Steve Harvey's watch, both for the same reason. Steve turned to Sandra. She was standing at the podium. The funeral program was still in her hand. Her composure was holding, barely, visibly, the way a window holds when the crack has already started and every vibration threatens to complete it. Steve walked to her. He did not kneel. He stood beside her and put his hand on the podium next to hers, not on her, near her, giving her the space to hold herself up while letting her know he was there. "Tell me about him," Steve said. And Sandra told him. She told him about Robert, about the blue plaid shirt, and the gymnasium, and the have a good one, baby, and the 23 years. She told him about the life insurance application sitting on the kitchen counter. She told him about the $3,100 and the funeral home and the 17-year-old basketball players who donated their part-time job money. Her voice did not crack. It was the voice of a 4th-grade teacher, steady, clear, calibrated to carry information to the back of a room, and she used it now the way she used it every day, as a tool to hold the shape of herself in place while the contents shifted. The studio fell completely silent for the second time. 300 people listening to a widow explain why a folded piece of paper in her hand mattered more than any number on any board. A camera operator on the upper platform pressed both hands against her face. Even the crew had stopped. Hardened television professionals were looking at the floor. Steve turned to the camera. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home right now," he said. His eyes were red. "This woman is a 4th-grade teacher. She makes $41,000 a year. She lost her husband 4 months ago. He was a high school basketball coach. He died on his gymnasium floor." Steve's voice tightened. And she is standing on this stage holding his funeral program because she owes $3,100 to the funeral home, and a woman just laughed at her for missing one point. He paused. Not here, not ever. But Steve wasn't done. Family Feud is awarding the Mitchell family the full $20,000 prize tonight, he said. The audience erupted, louder than usual, harder, the sound of 300 people directing their anger and their grief and their love into a single wave aimed at a widow in a blue shirt. Charlene had come through the partition. She was holding Sandra. Patricia was holding Charlene. But Steve wasn't done. He held up his hand. I am personally covering the remaining funeral balance tonight, he said. Every dollar. And I am establishing a fund in Robert Mitchell's name for the families of teachers and coaches who die without life insurance. Because a man who spends his life teaching other people's children should not be buried on a payment plan. The room went still. 300 people stopped breathing. Sandra looked at Steve. She held up the funeral program, Robert's face, the blue plaid shirt, the smile, and she pressed it against her chest with both hands. Her chin trembled. That was the only visible break. The chin, the slight downward pull of the mouth, and then she straightened and she looked at Steve, and she said, in a voice that carried to the back row, "Thank you for not letting her laugh at my husband." Steve Harvey pressed his handkerchief against his face. He turned away from the cameras. His shoulders were shaking. A floor director with 12 years on the show said it was the only time she had ever heard the audience begin to applaud and then stop, because applause felt wrong, and what replaced it was something closer to reverence. The studio fell completely silent one final time, and in that silence, Patricia, who had known Sandra for 31 years, who had been the maid of honor at her wedding, who had driven from Valdosta at 4 a.m. to be at this taping, reached past Charlene and took Sandra's hand and held it, and neither woman said a word, because 31 years of friendship had built a language that did not require them. When the episode aired 5 weeks later, the clip of Steve saying "You will not laugh here" was viewed 64 million times in its first 10 days. It trended #1 in 29 countries. 3 months after the taping, the funeral balance was paid in full. Sandra drove to Barnes & Son Funeral Home on a Tuesday after school. Frank Barnes handed her the receipt. She looked at it for a long time. She folded it and put it in her purse next to the funeral program. She drove home. She sat in the driveway for 15 minutes. Then she went inside and made dinner for one. And she sat at the kitchen table and she ate it. A year after the taping, the Robert Mitchell Educators Memorial Fund had raised $4.1 million and provided funeral assistance to more than 290 families of teachers and coaches who died without adequate life insurance. Today, the fund has grown to $7.8 million across 32 states. Sandra still teaches 4th grade. She still carries the funeral program. She still keeps Robert's reading glasses on the nightstand. But the lamp Robert always left on because a dark room made him feel like he was forgetting something, Sandra turns it off now. Not because she has forgotten. Because she has learned that the things worth remembering do not need a light to stay visible. In a 2023 interview with Tamron Hall, Steve Harvey was asked about the second removal. He looked at his hands. "People ask me if I have a rule," he said. "I don't have a rule. I have a line. And the line is simple. You do not laugh at someone's pain in my presence. You do not laugh at grief. You do not laugh at a person who is carrying something you do not understand." He paused. That woman was holding her husband's picture. His picture. And someone laughed. He shook his head. "Not while I'm breathing." Last September, on the 2nd anniversary of Robert's death, Sandra's 4th grade class did something she did not expect. They had been studying community helpers, police officers, firefighters, doctors, coaches. A student named Marcus, who was 9 years old and who had never met Robert Mitchell, raised his hand and said, "Mrs. Mitchell, was your husband a community helper?" Sandra looked at him. "Yes, baby," she said. "He was." Marcus said, "Then he should be on our wall." The class made a poster. They drew a basketball court. They drew a man in a blue plaid shirt. They wrote his name in block letters, Coach Mitchell. They hung it on the wall next to the firefighters and the doctors. Sandra took a photograph of the poster and sent it to Steve Harvey with 3 words: "He's on the wall." He's on the wall. 4 words from a widow whose husband was laughed at on a game show stage and who carried his funeral program in her hand every day for 2 years, because putting it down felt like leaving him somewhere. Because sometimes dignity is not the absence of pain. It is the refusal to let someone else decide what your pain is worth. And sometimes the person who protects that dignity is not a lawyer or a judge or a policy. It is a man in a suit who looks at a woman laughing and says 5 words that carry the weight of every person who has ever been mocked while grieving. You will not laugh here. Not at her. Not at him. Not at the funeral program she is holding against her heart. Not ever. Have you ever stayed when someone expected you to follow? Have you ever chosen your own dignity when it would have been easier to make yourself smaller? Share your story in the comments below. If this moment moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that your worth is not determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. And ring that notification bell, because stories like these are the reason this channel exists.